is one, flowing from the creator of life, the creator of the particular manifestations of life that we are. And they are a part of God's coming into God's self in the particulars of the cosmic journey. He believed that there is a basic unity that undergirds all that is. And therefore, the question of justice is seen in the larger context of wholeness, of common ground, of the necessity for life to come into fulfillment, which for Dr. Thurman is God coming into God's self and self-realization in time. Let me give you an example of Dr. Thurman's connection with life. This is from his book, With Head and Heart. It is the autobiography of Dr. Howard Thurman. And there's a lot that comes before this, but this is one particular passage that talks about his connection with nature, with the unity of life. Okay. It starts at the very bottom of page 8. When the storms blew, the branches of the large oak tree in our backyard would snap and fall. But the topmost branches of the oak tree would sway, giving way just enough to save themselves from snapping loose. I needed the strength of that tree. And like it, I wanted to hold my ground. Eventually, I discovered that the oak tree and I had a unique relationship. I could sit with my back against its trunk and feel the same peace that would come to me in my bed at night. I could reach down in the quiet places of my spirit, take out all my bruises and my joys, unfold them, and talk about them. I could talk aloud to the oak tree and know that I was understood. It too was a part of my reality, like the woods, the night, the pounding surf, my earliest companions giving me space. You might recall there was a poem that Nikki Giovanni wrote in 1968. Trees could talk, what would they say? Many people have this idea of Thurman, and they love it. Thurman talking to the tree. One of the great scholars, Howard Thurman, used that the last summer in Africa. He actually talked with trees. But what he didn't say was that the tree also talked to him. And what did the tree say to Howard Thurman, little Howard Thurman? I got your back. That's what the tree said. I got your back. Don't worry, I'm holding you. This is your security. That unity that he talked about, that wholeness, however, that vitality, we all experience. See, that's important. That's what Thurman is trying to get us back to. When Mr. Thurman says he leads you home, leading us back to the authentic self, which we may not remember, but that's what happened when we were born. That authentic self that was at one with the universe, with creation, okay? So he's trying to get us to understand that is so important for us to return to that place. So he said, vitality is contradicted by the things, the constructs, the barriers that humans construct that deny this basic interconnectivity. For example, injustice is a contradiction in the unity of life. Oppression goes against the intention of creation. The perpetrators of injustice do something else. They give a very false sense of their superiority. That's a false understanding. And they give a false understanding of the inferiority of those that they oppress. This subverts the idea that everyone is of infinite worth and excludes the others from magnetic field of concern. It is a blatant moral irresponsibility. And each person, and this is our challenge, this is where it differs again a little bit from liberation theology. Each person has the moral responsibility to resist injustice by choosing to stand opposing the walls, opposing the barriers, with the understanding that they are neither final nor ultimate. For they are against life and therefore against God. One of his favorite sayings is which I just said, but he repeats it in various places: the contradictions of life are neither final nor ultimate. So all those things out there, the races and sexes and all those negative things, they're not final. They may appear to be final. They may appear to be over, but they're not. And once you understand that they're not, then you have the option of choosing how you are going to live. I think I might have shared the last one of the songs, the spirituals. Before I'll be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. That's an option. I can fight for freedom. I don't have to accept this. In fact, Dr. Thurman says one of the problems of the disinherited is that too often they accept or they try to mimic those who are in control, therefore losing themselves in a false kind of identity and a false sense of security. The isms, some of the isms that Thurman talked about that come from his appreciation and his reading of the poem of the poet, Francis Thompson, who wrote the poem, The Hounds of Hell. And in the poem, he talks about the hounds of hell, and Thurman extrapolates the idea and then goes in discussion of what are some of those hounds. For the hounds that he mentioned, are three of them: are fear, deception, and hatred. He said these are the things that dog the steps of the oppressed. They're always present. And how do you deal with these things? Fear, deception, hatred. So he helps us in terms of liberation to understand Jesus as a liberation person, as a person of liberation, okay? I would say, so in his book, Jesus and the Disinherited, which is the first book of his that I read, which was published in 1949, a personal story. Let me tell you how important this book was to me. Hector mentioned we met up in 69. In 68, I came to Berkeley to study at PSR. And I was fortunate enough to do some field work with Reverend Cecil Williams at Glide United Methodist Church. I didn't know anything about him, but I met him at a rally, anti-war rally, and he was so impressive. I went to his church. I was Baptist, but he was I just said, well, okay, he's really great. And so on. After about 3 Sundays, he asked me if I would be interested in working with him, if he could find some money, a little stipend. I go, oh, fine. So I worked with him, and it was a great experience, one of the best experiences I've ever had. And really, from him, I was really pulled into the ministry, okay? Even though my theological education at that time was lacking. I mean, because I had come from Brown University, I was in this radical position, militant position, anti-war, and the school was not really dealing with issues at that time that I really thought it should deal with. That's why the Center for Urban Black Studies with Hector, Dr. Williams, Reverend Farlow saved me, because there was one place I could go where they were dealing with the issues in the larger society. This is basically after I moved. In fact, they were dealing with it so beautifully that I left the employ of Glide and Dr. Reverend Cecil Williams to spend my time with the Center for Urban Black Studies. And this was even though Cecil Williams was going to double my salary. But I felt as though what was happening at the Center for Urban Black Studies challenging theology, okay? Because I felt as though if we can challenge theology, if we can get people who are studying to be ministers to change and to understand, that would multiply the impact, throughout the community, throughout the world, rather than, although it's dealing with very important issues in San Francisco with Reverend Williams, all kinds of welfare mothers, this kind of thing, food. My point is that was really dealing a lot with the symptoms. And I thought that the ministers, with their spiritual understanding, could have a much more profound, I guess, impact on the world. So I left that and joined the Center for Black Studies. Now, the reason I'm saying that is when I was at San Francisco State, when I was working with Reverend Cecil Williams, one of my responsibilities was to call community members for the strike at San Francisco State, okay? San Francisco State was striking for ethnic studies department, and it was community as well as the students. And so I would call, especially the Black community leaders, and tell them where we were meeting, what time, this and that, and so on. Well, there was a Black student at San Francisco State. Well, actually, he was studying law. We called him, his name was Scooter. And Scooter was connected with church also, but he knew that I was studying for the ministry. And he never failed to just always Christianity. And so when things would go on, he would say to me, okay, he would call me Sweet Jesus for some reason. Okay, Sweet Jesus, what are you going to do about that issue? Pray about it, and things and he would just get on my nerve. Okay, Sweet Jesus. And when Thurman's book came out, though, and I saw that Jesus was an oppressed person living under the domination of Rome, that he was a Jew, a poor Jew living under domination, and how he lived his life, then I'm going, aha, this is a religion of which I am a part. And it is not the religion that just goes along with things. It's not the religion that just prays about things, but Jesus is actively involved in changing people's lives, bringing new consciousness, inspiring people in terms of what they could be. And so it just changed my life in terms of what Christianity was for me, to read Jesus and the Disinherited. And then he dealt with so many of the things that oppressed people have to deal with, fear, especially. I mentioned, I think the last time when Dr. King again, when the woman, I saw the film with the woman and she asked who was in the Birmingham movement, they asked her to evaluate Dr. King and she said, he took the fear out of us. And he did. I lived in the South for about 5.5 years, teaching at the University of Alabama, Tuscaloosa, which was certainly more liberal than a lot of other places. Although if I tell you some of the stories, you will see it was not liberal because of the university town. But the oppression, the fear, you still had to be very careful as a Black person, what you said, where you went, or whatever. Next door was Mississippi. And the controversy about removing statues and so on is real, because I remember going from Tuscaloosa into Mississippi, and there were Confederate flags everywhere. As a Black person, you were afraid. You did not know what to do. I had a little church about 40 miles from campus, and there were two Black church, and they were pretty wealthy. They were farmers, but very wealthy. And one owned, I think, like 2,000 acres of land or whatever. And he talked about how once he was stopped by the police because he had a new truck. And I said, boy, whose truck is this? And he goes, boss man's truck. He goes, oh, okay, then, fine, So the fear of even owning too much, being too educated. Another experience was in Tuscaloosa. I was going to Montgomery for a meeting, a religious meeting of the Baptist Convention. And I hadn't eaten all day. It was just really busy. I didn't eat. And I said, well, let me get to the convention. So I started driving and I became very hungry. So I said, oh, I just have to get something to eat or whatever. I'm just really starving. And I looked over and there was a little diner. I said, oh, there's a diner. So I said, let me go. Then all of a sudden it goes, You don't want to go to that diner. That may be your last supper, and no one will remember you. This kind of thing. But it was that kind of fear. You never knew what was going to happen to you. So he deals with the fact that the oppressed have to deal with fear. And it's like the fog, he said, in San Francisco or London. It's everywhere and nowhere at the same time. So how do you deal with these issues if you're an oppressed person, if you're trying to liberate yourself? So that was one of the questions. How do you deal with fear? He said it rises out of a sense of isolation and helplessness in the face of the varied dimensions of violence to which the underprivileged are exposed. Again, it doesn't have to be that you experience it yourself, you know, but perceived violence. Have you ever been, for example I just gave, in New York City, or walking down a dark street at night and you're a person of color or woman, and you realize, no, I don't need to go that way, you know. Not that it's happened to you, not that you've been violent, but you do know what the possibilities are. So it's that kind of fear. So one of the things you deal with is the question of fear. And I'm going to quit after this couple of other things, and then I want to hear from you. Another one of the hounds of hell is deception. And he said, well, oppressed people live by deceiving people. You have to. You know, that's one of the ways you get by. You're not honest with people. But the fear of, he said, but the ultimate consequence of deception is to become a deception. You remember Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde? And Dr. Jekyll would take this potion, become Mr. Hyde, this bad person or whatever, and he would just do it just periodically. And all of a sudden, Mr. Hyde took over. Dr. Jekyll became Mr. Hyde. There's a poem that Paul Laurence Dunbar wrote that some of you might know. It's called We Wear the Mask. When he's talking about Black people growing up with where we wear the mask that grins and lies. It hides our cheeks. It shades our eyes. This debt we pay to human guile. With torn and bleeding hearts, we smile and mouth with myriad subtleties. Why should the world be otherwise in counting all of our tears and sighs? Nay, let them only see us while we wear the mask. We smile, but oh, great Christ, our cries to thee from tortured souls arise. We sing, but oh, the clay is vile beneath our feet and long the mile, but let the world dream otherwise. We wear the mask. And that is often the case of people who are disinherited or marginalized. They wear the mask, afraid of really saying or being what they're called to be, not knowing what the consequences might be. But again, the final consequence of a deception is to become a deception oneself, to lose all sense of moral understanding. And the other one is the thing of hatred. And it says hatred begins in a situation in which there is contact without fellowship. Okay. If you look at, I think, our political scene right now, you will see how true this is. And some of the people who've been acting up, contacts without fellowship, without the warmth of understanding, of being together. One of the things that they used to do at the church a long time ago is they had dinners, international dinners, and they would have people to come from, let's say, from India, okay, and they would dress in Indian wear and they'd talk about India, and people would bring Indian food and so on, as a way of getting to know people beyond the surface, of really getting to understand their cultures and being together and so on. And then Thurman says you have these contacts without fellowship. Then the contacts without fellowship tend to express themselves in a kind of understanding that is strikingly unsympathetic. There's no empathy with the others, these contacts without fellowship. And that leads to an active functioning of ill will, which finally then realizes itself as a dramatized in a human being, becoming hatred walking on earth. And he says that how we deal with this is through the concept of love. Okay, is through the concept of love, where we take the person out of the category of the other. And this is what he does with the tax collector, with the women, this kind of, you take them out of the context of the other and deal with them as your sister and your brother. He says the religion of Jesus makes the love ethic central. That must love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, thy mind, soul, strength, and thy neighbor as oneself. And then he explains who the neighbor is. I'm going to finish up with this and then we'll talk. If you look at the epilogue of Jesus and Disinherited, it says some very shocking things. You might want to close your ears, because he said what Jesus did, any of us could do. Now, I know a lot of people are in high Christology, and what Jesus did, we could do. What he did because he made decisions all along the way about how he was going to live his life. How he was going to say yes to the call, to the claim being made on his life. And we can see that we can go back to even to when the baptism and he goes into the wilderness and so on, making decisions. Now that is a dramatic understanding of Jesus and his decision-making, but it happens throughout his life. You know, before he goes into Jerusalem, he's saying instead of going, they thought he was going to make it to Jericho, and he goes, nope. And that's when Peter said, oh, but you can't. He said, no, I got to go. I'm going to be killed. And you know, Peter said, no, you can't do that. No, we can't. And he says, get behind me. Quit hindering what I have got to do. As I said last time, Martin Luther King did the same kind of thing when he went to Memphis and knew the night before he said, I know the threats are out on me. I'm not worried about it. I just want to do God's will. And God's allowed me to go to the mountaintop. I've looked over, I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but we as a people will get to the promised land. And so that was Jesus saying, this is the decision I must make. I must go to Jerusalem, the seat of power, religious and political. I must go and take a stand there. There are some things more precious than even how long you live. And that is taking a stand, a commitment for what you know is right, with the understanding that God or the creator of life will take care of you. It may not mean that you're going to live forever, but you'll be taken care of. You will fold back into the life of God. So I want to stop there. There's some other things I want to say. I'll get to those later. But I would like to have some questions from you or comments as we go forward. Is this concerts? Was your hand up? No. Is it up? Okay.
Yeah. Dick, unmute yourself. Where'd they go?
He took himself.
Whoops. Oh, there they are. There. You're unmuted. Go ahead.
He said to put your hand up. Sorry.
Do you have a question?
Oh.
I don't think so. Do you have a question?
Oh.
No, sorry.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Okay.
I guess we misunderstood.
Okay, Anne, you have a question.
Okay.
No.
Oh, no, sorry. That was my icon looking like a hand.
Okay.
Anybody?
Shall I continue? A question or comment?
You can keep going.
Well, I will ask this, what were you looking for? What were some of the things that brought you to the discussion of Howard Thurman? Okay. And then I'll go from there. What was your interest in attending this?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm the person who puts books on the shelf in the library. And so I always look, we have all these books about Howard Thurman. And Lynn always says, well, you know what? Hector really likes the books about Howard. And so I thought, I mean, this is pretty superficial, isn't it? But I thought, okay, so I want to know about these books. And then I thought, Liberation Theology. I bought a book last summer in Michigan. I could never make the times that they were talking because I was in Michigan, but I want to know more about it. So that's why I'm here, to learn more. And thank you. I'm writing notes in my little notebook here.
Okay.
I think Laura, you had something to say?
Yeah, you know what? I was also curious about, he's always referred to as a mystic. And I'm not, I would like to learn a little bit more at that, if you could.
Okay. Yes, he was. But he was not the person who would go around saying, I'm a mystic. He just was, you know. And you can see the mysticism in what I read about him as a boy and his relationship to the tree. Prior to that, he talked about his relationship with the night and the ocean, the noise of the. So this is a person who is tuned into the creation, or to God, or the cosmos. Now, Matthew Fox says that all of us are mystics, because we've all had that experience. We've all had some relationship where we were connected with that, really beyond that, beyond ourselves, that birthed us. What happens is we lose the mysticism by accepting so much of what society has given us as what is right or what is important. Individualism, self-sufficiency, raise yourself up by your own bootstrap. All of that goes against our independence. So mysticism requires a sense of independence with one another, with the larger life creation, and with the creator, the person who brought us into life. So yes, he was a mystic without any question. And one of the things that happened with me was, again, I worked with him a year as his program director. And this was again during the 69, 60, 68, 68, 69, 70, 71, the good old days of social change, you know. And at the same time, and there were times when I really felt as though, what is God doing, you know? I mean, if God was really on the case, we wouldn't be having all these problems. So what's God's problem, you know? I mean, is there really such a reality or whatever? Those are questions that I might raise personally, but in the presence of Dr. Thurman, they all dissolved. Because in his presence, you knew he was connected with God and with this reality. And you vicariously became connected with it because the connection was so strong. Also, remember, this is 68, 69, 70, when a lot of Black folks were saying, we can't deal with this integration thing. You know, white people are going to never change, blah, blah, blah. This, and so we need to go ahead and do our own thing. But with Dr. Thurman, he made you believe that we cannot survive alone, any of us isolated. The only way for us to survive is to come into a sense of community. Reverend Phil Lawson says the opposite of slavery is not freedom, it's community.
Right.
Martin Luther King talks about either chaos or community. Okay. Thurman talks about, and I'll read at the very end, he talks about the search for common ground. So that's why I'm saying he goes in a way beyond liberation theology, because it goes, liberation theology helps us to deal with those systems of oppression. And Thurman says, and dealing with those systems of oppression, now what is your responsibility for yourself? I think I mentioned there's this song, Climbing Jacob's Ladder, where every round goes higher and higher. And Thurman says at the top of the ladder is Jehovah, he called Jehovah, and raising this question. What have you done? Let me see. No, How have you been faithful to the truth that God has given you? Okay. No, here it is. How have you lived your life in the knowledge of your truth? How have you lived your life in the knowledge of your truth? And he says that you can never let any other person take over your life. There is a temptation. We react a lot. And Thurman said we have to get beyond reacting to oppression, reacting to this, they're acting to that. You've got to do more than that. That's not enough. That's good. It's beginning, but you've got to go deeper. How do you live your life in the midst of being oppressed? You have a responsibility in terms of, you might not have a responsibility in terms of what things come your way, but you do have a responsibility in terms of how you respond to those. How do you respond to the injustice? How do you respond to the oppression? That is your responsibility. And then he also says, in terms of mysticism, pushing it, is that, remember in Matthew at the very end, was 26, where he talked about the judgment scene, where God's going to judge the people. The king comes and judge the people who visit the sick and blah, blah, blah. And he talks about when did you not, and they're surprised, the ones who are granted to say, well, when did we do all this good stuff? And he said, well, when you did it to the least of these, you did it to me. So what he is saying there, the way we treat the least of these is the way we treat God. And as we minister to the least of these, we're ministering to God. There's no separation there. So Thurman, if nothing, Thurman has this thing of the wholeness of life, our relationships, and our responsibility to further those relationships. So he would say that all the oppressions that we deal with come from things that are created by human beings. All of our systems of oppression come from our creations from human beings. Therefore, human beings can also change them. If we go back to his idea of when he was a child, and he talks about the trees sitting, but he's trying to help us to understand, related to Jesus again, when they're quarreling about who's going to be the greatest, and brings a child and says, unless you become like this child, you never enter. He's talking about the imagination of the child. Thurman is talking about imagination. Children imagine. Children can create a different world and live in that world. And even come back to the world, deal with what they've got to deal with, but they can sit down and have tea with a neighbor, a friend who's not there, but it's tea, and they can have this kind of thing and talk about all kinds of things and dream new worlds into being and so on. That's part of being liberated. Our problem is then we say to the child, no, you don't do that. No, this is the way you're supposed to act. Okay, this is what you're supposed to. And all of a sudden, that mysticism, Laura, that the child has from the beginning, that we had from the beginning, gets co-opted into socialized reality. What is right, what is proper, not what is authentic, not in terms of what is integrity, but how do we fit into a structure that we did not create, and certainly God did not create.
So I have a question.
Yes.
I was intrigued by your conversation about deception and how those who are oppressed wear that as a mask, but also as a tool to survive.
Survive, exactly. Yes.
That made me wonder, how is it deception when those who are oppressed have this desire or rush to forgiveness? So I'm thinking of,
Wow.
like the shooting at Charleston at that church, where there were people commended the families of those who were murdered because they forgave the racist shooter. And I think that sometimes that those who are oppressed, we often forgive too quickly.
Mhm. I would agree.
And I think there's something inauthentic about that because there's a desire to either be accepted or whatever. But comment on that.
I think that it's sometimes true of people wanting to be accepted or whatever. And I think sometimes people have, because they're church by whatever, actually say, I forgive or whatever. But I'm not sure easy forgiveness helps the person who has done the deed. So that's not, I don't think, because there needs to be some kind of remorse. There needs to be some kind of real understanding of how hurtful what the person did was, how it went against the unity that Thurman talks about, how it destroys creation, how it violates our interdependence. So there needs to be some time to deal with that seriously. And so I don't think a lot of times and I'm not sure it even helps. Coming from some people, I don't even know if it's appreciated, when in the Charlottesville, somebody, I forgive you folks but I'm not sure they appreciate that. They might say, well, who cares? You forgive me or not, I think for the family, it's trying to maybe say that we don't hold anything against you. And that might be that might be sincere on their part. It may be but it may be sincere on their part. They hold no grudges. It is, and now in hold no grudges, they forgive. But the other thing about forgiveness is, on the other side, it allows you to no longer be controlled by the person who's violated you. Now, I had to learn this myself because I felt really mistreated. And I was preaching one Sunday morning, and the scripture came to me, but if your brother holds something against you, and I was really going on, and I go, oh, that applies to my situation. Not that I think I've done anything, but he thinks that oh my goodness. So what do I've got to, because, and this is what Thurman talks about the hatred too. If you are holding something against someone else, that is destroying your own creativity. That is blocking you from doing the things you need to do because that person is controlling you, controlling your emotions. It's almost like Buffalo, what's his name? The strings that, howdy doody, you're being pulled. You're responding to some strings that somebody else is pulling. So from that reason, authentic forgiveness, I think, is very important. It is freeing for me. And I remember when that happened to me, it did free me. I no longer had bad thoughts about that person or what that person did or whatever, because it was just one of those things. And I realized that we make errors as human beings. He made one, and what he and others had done to me, they had done, and I have moved on past those. So that forgiveness did free me to be me instead of me reacting to somebody else, and therefore not being as creative as I could be. But a great question. I've had the same reactions at times from the person, I forgive them. Well, I don't know if that's a gift or a hindrance to the development of the other.
This is Diana, and I have a question.
Okay.
Or sort of a comment, maybe. So I studied liberation theology a good bit some years ago. And that's when I got introduced to Dr. Thurman from Katie Cannon, who I know
Oh,
you
great.
know.
Great.
And as you're describing him, and I have not read as much as I should of him, and I'm going to get several of the books you've recommended because I've always wanted to read him more from a spiritual guide point of view. And it sounds like, I mean, your understanding of him in relation to liberation theology is different from what I studied in the sense of looking at both gay liberation theology, feminist, and Latino and Mujerista theology and that sort of thing, because those are more systemic.
Yes.
And more analytical in a sense. I mean, they come out of grassroots experience, the real lives of women and gay folks and trans folks and so forth. But I guess what I'm wondering is, I really feel very touched and moved by what you're saying about Dr. Thurman, but it does look like he comes at it from a more personal
Yes.
point of view. And so, is that right?
Yes, you're correct.
Okay, so he would be a good one, and from what you're describing, to, as we work through liberation theology, to take into our meditations and into our prayer and into our spiritual journey, so that we can find liberation and help others also find that out of their own lives. Is that, rather than not talking about the whole system?
But Thurman did talk about the whole system too. Okay.
Okay.
And if you read his book, for example, The Luminous Darkness, which a lot of people are afraid of, but it's an analysis of segregation. And that's where he says that the segregation is a violation of both the segregator and the segregate it. Segregate all this kind of thing. So he does deal in that situation. His point is not to ignore the systems that oppress. And in the last chapter in his book, Disciplines of the Spirit, he deals with reconciliation. And he even says in that book that when the injustice is not being dealt with, people have the right, and in fact, responsibility to organize, to have nonviolent protests. So he talks about those kinds of things, but he also says beyond all of that, even when we've done that, we still have a responsibility to make sure that we are responding to God's claim on our own lives. Even beyond that, okay? What I'm saying is, so that we just can't say we're liberal, we're going to deal with the oppressive structures, and that's it for our ministries. We're going, no, there's something that goes even deeper than that, because what Thurman is saying, deep down at the core of us, we are more, not that we we're all just individuals stripped to the literal substance of ourselves. In many ways, he's saying, and I don't want to mistake, we're not black, white, male, female, we're expressions of God. And that goes beyond the biological or social labels that have been put upon us in terms of race, class, gender, these kinds of things. So remember, Dr. Thurman was at Boston University in the 50s. And at that time, there was a school of personalism where a lot of people are talking about it was trying to give dignity, again, not in opposition to liberation theology, which was not around, but trying to give dignity and understanding to the power of the person and the personality. So you had Booth there, you had Thurman, you had Alan Knight Chalmers, you had several other people who were in the school saying we have to really get deep down within and change the person to understand what the potential of the personality of the person to bring about social change. And one of the reasons this is so powerful is that there are a lot of people could use excuses, say, well, I don't want to get out there with Black Lives Matter because I don't know what they're going to do. And I say that myself at times, I don't know what they're going to do, blah, 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 blah. Okay. So maybe you're not going to get out there and deal with this. And a lot of people feel as though I'm overwhelmed by the system. I don't know how to change it. Well, you can begin with, you said there are things that you can change in terms of your own places where you are, where you live. And Thurman is saying you have a responsibility. Not only can you have a responsibility, you have a responsibility to bring about this interconnectedness. And then you have to figure out how you're going to do that, but you have a responsibility. Because he will even say, in one of the places, he said, even when you eat, and you are benefiting from life that has given up itself for you. So all of us have benefited from people, from things, from that have added to who we are. They have given to who we are. The things that we eat, the people along the way who inspired us. So we have a responsibility ourselves to then try to inspire, to help others to move forward. We have that responsibility. And what liberation theology does, I would say that's very positive, it helps us to, because a lot of people, see, this is the other side, a lot of people got caught up in the idea, oh, well, I can just change one person, that's nice. But what liberation theology says, it's important to understand too, it's not just about one person pulling oneself up by the books. There are systems, and you need to deal with the systems out there that marginalize people. That's important too. And Thurman's saying beyond that, there is this thing in terms of how have you lived your life in the knowledge of your truth? Or the contradictions of life are not final or ultimate. So it's not in opposition. I would say that Thurman and King, see, many people not consider, is King a liberation theologian? My question. He came along before liberation theology. But maybe King, even more so, helps us to see both. Dealing with the systems and also the personal thing in terms of when he talks about reconciliation with the oppressor and moving forward. So King, I think, in fact, my position is that King is a younger, and King applies Thurman to social issues more clearly than we see in Thurman, okay? King has a lot of the same ideas. And the reality is that when Martin Luther King was studying for his PhD at Boston University, Thurman was there as the Dean of Chapel. Now, and Thurman, and it said the King went over and watched the World Series. They're both like Jagger, the World Series and so on with the Thurmans. Now, in terms of families, the families knew each other. Dr. Howard Thurman and Martin Luther King Sr. were at Morehouse together, okay? Mrs. Sue Bailey Thurman and Alberta King, Martin Luther King's mother, knew each other because they were in school together, and they were both daughters of Baptists, and they meet at these Baptist conventions and district meetings and so on. So they knew each other. So the other thing about this whole scenario is that Thurman met in 1936 with Mahatma Gandhi. He was the first African-American, along with his wife and another person, to ever have an audience with Mahatma Gandhi. This is in India. They spent several hours together, and they talked about nonviolence, okay? So then Thurman becomes mentor to Martin Luther King and talks about nonviolence. Alan Knight Chalmers, who was a preaching professor at Boston University, was a mentor of Martin Luther King. And you hear him talking about beloved community, even before King, okay? So you have this relationship of King, Gandhi, Thurman, King. Okay. An interesting question I would like, and this is a question I pose for all of us, is that when Dr. King was at Boston University and went to visit the Thurmans, Remember, the Thurmans had left San Francisco and Fellowship Church to go to Boston University. Okay. Mrs. Thurman asked Martin Luther King Jr., the one we love and blah, 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 about becoming the minister at the Church for the Fellowship of All Peoples in San Francisco, the church that Thurman founded, the church where I am right now, okay? And that's when she learned that he had just committed himself to going to Montgomery. So the question I ask you is, what if? What if? What if he had said, yeah, San Francisco is much more liberal and open than Montgomery? Yeah. I think he would have been a great preacher, great pastor. But I wonder what would have happened in Montgomery without his leadership. The Montgomery boycott was actually started by women, Black women, who were organized politically. When Rosa Parks, the incident Rosa Parks, they got upset and they called E.D. Nixon, who was sort of the community leader. He worked with the sleeping car workers, H. Philip Randolph's group. And then he called Abernathy, Ralph Abernathy, and then King, and they talked, but the women had said, we need to boycott these buses. And all he did, Nixon, was he told King and that we need to call a boycott, okay? But it was King's unique putting together of his charisma, his Christianity, and his nonviolence and so on that made that movement. I don't think, I think there could have been a movement, but I don't think it would have had the kind of success it would have had without King and his extraordinary oratory and his deep understanding of change and nonviolence. But that's what I mean by the decisions that we make. And I know I'm getting off of Thurman, but Thurman and King to me are just, so when King made the decision to go to Montgomery, he was not sure of all, but he has said there seemed to be something underground that was beginning to boil in the South. There was something, it had not emerged yet, but there was a feeling that something's going to happen, something is about to be born, and that he wanted to be a part of it. So he went. Now look at the sacrifices, because his wife Coretta was an opera singer. So she had given up her career to go to Montgomery. She certainly would have had much more of a chance in San Francisco or the East Coast. And he had offers in the East Coast, King. But the decision to go to Montgomery. Well, anyway, this again is when Thurman talks, the last page in the epilogue of his book, Jesus and the Disinherited, he talks about our responsibility. It's about the decisions we make along the way. He says in another book, Apostles of the System, he says that I must choose the things for which I will live, commit myself, and die. And this maybe die, and I must choose the things against which I will give my full energy, my commitment, and so on. And that's what we all have to wrestle with, I say as a minister. What are the things to which we are willing to totally commit ourselves? And what are the things which we will totally commit ourselves against? And to me, that is the challenge of anybody, of any faith. And I don't mean traditional faith. I don't mean you have to be in religion, but for anybody, what are the things for which we shall give our lives? And see, this is the depth of the religious understanding, that if we give our lives, we're really not losing them, we're gaining. It may not be a gain in terms of longevity, but Who would not like to have the experience the king said, I've seen the promised land?
Mhm.
Who would not want to have the experience that Jesus says, into thy hands I commit my spirit? They're becoming one with the person with the reality that sent you. Becoming one, that experience that comes when you totally surrender. And Islam really does a much better job in a way of helping us to understand the need to totally surrender to that. In Islam, that mystery, that the great immanence, the great mystery being part of it. So,
Pat, do you have a question?
I just want to make a comment, and maybe it is a question also, Dr. Blake. I really appreciate from the bottom of my heart what you've been talking about. My own experience in Central America, and where I think the intersectionality of liberation theology and the kind of personal faith journey and the tough decisions you're talking about, it's really the fact that even though liberation theology has this very powerful systemic analysis, by the fact that it was grounded in base Christian communities throughout the region, it affected people's lives who had deep spirituality.
yes.
And so what you see coming out of that is, on the one hand, as they say, to have the Bible in one hand and the newspaper in the other, and to do the interaction. But what I have seen and still is going on, even though some of the quote early successes, you might say, in places like Nicaragua became sour because of political power struggles, etc. But at the base level, there are people still walking the talk and making those
I
decisions.
agree with you. Right.
And to me, that's the power of what liberation theology has meant, not just in Latin America, but Africa and other parts of the world. So I'm not as familiar with Dr. Thurman as you are, but I'm more familiar with the other. But hearing what you're saying, it seems to me it's not either or, it's both and.
That's what I'm saying. And I will say that, again, what James Cone did when I was is to give me an analysis. Again, his first thing when he's talking about Black theology and Black power, those can go together. Yes, they can. And some understanding must go together. And the help me, again, with my sociological background, I was a social major finally. It's helpful. It's really helpful in terms of an overall analysis. And a lot of people, during Thurman's time, a lot of people did say, well, it's just one-on-one. You just have to, and yes and no. Because it's not just one-on-one, it's also we're dealing with systems, principalities, powers. And in this country, if I dare say it, we're dealing with a very strong capitalistic system that continues to ingrain an oppression. It's just there. And it is not something, it's not an aberration, it is part of it. That's part of its design. So if we're talking about this country moving forward with liberation theology and what Thurman is saying, then we've got to deal with that on a very serious level. Maybe for the next, and I think there's some things that Thurman and certainly King talked about that. King in his last couple of speeches was just last year was really, I said that's why he had to go. When he started talking about the Poor People Campaign, and we're going to he broke. Okay, again, some of the people that we see as being on the right in terms of politically right, some of the people who are just supporters of our former president and so on. Some of the same people King was going after. In Appalachia, their roles to say, you are being oppressed by this system too. Your poverty is not inherited. You're not this kind of thing. So instead of being an enemy of these other Black people, we've got something in common, what we need to work on. And again, my point is to envision Martin Luther King taking hundreds of thousands of people, poor people across barriers to Washington and saying, as King said, we're not going to leave until they see the poor and address the issues of the poor. There was no alternative, but he had to go. There was no alternative. If you're going to maintain your system, it was inevitable. And he knew it. And that's why that night before he talked about, I've heard what's going to happen to me if I'm sick, but it doesn't matter to me now. I've been to the mountaintop.
I think you're too young, Dorsey, but have you ever been to Highlander Center? I don't know if.
I was close to it. I am now on the faculty of the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Institute, which is a very interesting place. There are two there's the Samuel Proctor Conference, and there's the Samuel Proctor Institute that comes under the Children's Defense Fund that Marion Wright Edelman founded and was head of for so many years. She just retired. And Starsky Wilson, who is Reverend Stark, who was very involved in the Ferguson and building community, is now the new president there. They had people from Highlander at our meeting not this past summer, but the summer before. And I've been close to Highlander Institute, but I haven't had a chance to go there yet. I've been in the area, but just have never gotten there. But it's an important center for education and teaching people about nonviolence, and it's very strategic in terms of social change. You want to say more about that, Lynn?
I wasn't sure if it was still going on, but I think it is.
It is.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's still going on. It's
Okay.
still going on.
Yeah, yeah. And folks from Appalachia were involved in that.
Yes, very much so.
Don West, did you ever hear of Don West?
Yes, I think, I don't
He
know.
taught at Highlander, and I
Okay.
met him in West Virginia.
Right.
Powerful.
Yes. Well, and King was related to that as well as Rosa Parks. So it has played a very important role in a social movement.
Yeah, can I follow up on that? I appreciate you bringing up Highlander, and I've been thinking the whole time, and maybe Marvin, you kicked me off in the beginning talking about Paulo Freire, because Freire and Miles Horton were contemporaries of each other and developing their similar kind of methods, but without necessarily knowing each other at the time, and then they came together later in life. But I've been thinking, as you've been talking, Dorsey, about just that, again, the idea of praxis, right? And the example of Howard Thurman, in the sense of the reflection piece, right? And dealing with our own trauma from oppression or internalized supremacy, whatever it might be for us in different forms, like needing to deal with that and reflecting on that. And then that being sort of the anchor that propels us into action in the world, right? I just feel like what you're talking about for me just so relates to sort of that kind of cycle. I don't know if that connects for others too.
Thurman said a couple of things. He said, anything that blocks our coming into our own being, any institution, is against God and it's against life, and therefore we need to work against it. The other thing I was going to say before that was, a lot of people have condemned, and I do want to point this out. I want to straighten this out. A lot of people said, well, Thurman was not involved in the civil rights movement. Even this past year, I heard that many of the black leaders were saying, we were hoping that that Thurman would be our Moses, and he turned mystic on us. That's why I wanted to address the kind of mysticism before. Thurman was involved. He was involved in the Scottsboro boys case. Alan Knight Chalmers, again, the professor I mentioned earlier, was actually head of the NAACP's Defense Fund and had a lead in terms of getting money and defending those boys who were accused of the rape and so on. Dr. Thurman met with the families too. It was not known, it was not that kind of thing. But I also tell people, when they say Dr. Thurman was not involved in the civil rights movement, I'm going, what do you think the Church for the Fellowship of All Peoples is? It is his practicum in terms of dealing with racism in Americans and racial and religious exclusion. It came into being because all of the churches in the United States were segregated. You know, you used to say 11 o'clock on Sunday is the most segregated hour in the United States. They were all segregated. And this was his thing of saying, no, we must create a place where people from all backgrounds can come together and worship and have spiritual experiences, because we feel as though if this happens over a significant time period, there will emerge, again, a sense of community, a sense of common ground that will destroy all the barriers that separate us one from another. So this was a great testament against segregation. It was a civil rights, human rights project, a program that he was projecting, because he also understood the power of religion and the power of the churches to destroy or to heal. He often talked, when you read Jesus and Disinherited, he will make a distinction between what he calls the religion of Jesus, which he talks about in Jesus, and Christianity. And he says that Christianity really is a betrayer of the religion of Jesus. The religion of Jesus, as I said before, this is a religion of a person who was a Jew, poor Jew, living under Roman domination. And he tried to figure out, how do I live within this context? And how he lived was a light for others. It was not a religion of empire, as Christianity became. You know, Mahatma Gandhi, for example, was very much attracted by much of Christianity, especially the Sermon on the Mount. In fact, Gandhi said, if that was Christianity, I would definitely say I was a Christian, because I really believe that. But somebody asked Gandhi, what is the greatest impediment to Christianity, to Jesus taking hold of India? And he said, it was Christianity itself. You know, because he said what he meant by that, the imperialism of Christianity. That was the problem. He also said, when somebody asked him what he thought of Western civilization, he said, it would be a good idea. So anyway, so anyway.
The time is about over. We have one more question. Do you want to take another question? I have in the chat.
Oh, sure.
Okay, it's a question about how you see Dr. Barber and the Poor People's Campaign. And do you worry about Dr. Barber's safety as he too organizes across racial lines and focuses on poverty?
I admire Dr. Barber very much. He's an eloquent speaker, and we do need a Poor People's Campaign. There's absolutely no question about that. Yeah, he may suffer, I don't know, because you don't know what some of these people may do. But no, I appreciate his work very much so. He's dealing with something that is an extremely important issue. One of my concerns is they're still trying to get a system to do something that it is not in the best interest of the system to do. Capitalism, okay? In terms of capitalism, it's not in the interest. We could do it. We could take care of poverty. For example, Martin Luther King said in 1963, Hyman Bookbinder said, 63, we could end poverty in the United States. We could end it if the rich would agree to become even richer, but at a slower pace. Someone else said in 66 that we could end poverty, and it would cost about $30 billion And he said, but how much do we spend on war? King. Even not knocking space, but how much do we spend on other things? $30 billion, that's not, that significant. When you look at the kind of money we've got more than 800 military bases now across the world. Why? I mean, how many more missiles do we have to create? I mean, how many times how many missiles we can already destroy the world with a few that we have? So how many do we have to keep building? So we can end this. We have poverty. People misunderstand when Jesus said you'll have the poor you'll have with you always. It's not that he was saying that's good, that's just the reality. No, he's talking about that's our mentality. We're going to have the poor because of our own greed. But we don't have to have the poor. And again, to me, it's a shame. I get so embarrassed. And when I see in Oakland, you used to see some of these camps. I mean, it's just, I wonder about the disease. I wonder, how can this happen in this country? When I realize how many multi-billionaires we have. And my point is, are these multi-billionaires part of any faith community? If they are, what do the leaders of that faith community say to them? I would just say, I shouldn't say this. They can be members of Fellowship Church without giving up some of that money for the poor and doing some very significant things in the community. No, we welcome all people, but I have some serious problems to have people in the community who have the means. It wouldn't hurt them. They can take tax write-offs to really make significant change, and they refuse to do so for their own greed. Now, I think that's where some of the ministers need to really understand some things these days. But we're caught up too, so many of us, in terms of popularity, wanting to be invited to different places, governor's mansion, the White House, wanting to be able to speak on radio programs and TV and whatever, have our names in the paper.
Well, thank you, Reverend Dr. Dorsey Blake. We really appreciate it. A number of people had to leave and sent a chat to, I diverted some of it to me, but they really loved your sharing with us and your time with us. And they're clamoring for more, right, people? I think he should be on Ainsworth's staff.
Well, let's see down the line.
Okay. Yeah, we have a number of things. We have a big program on Palestine and justice in Palestine.
Wow.
Do you want to have the link? If you're interested, it'll be on a few Wednesdays.
I would just say this to you. That's very important, and I'm including that in my class this semester in transformative leadership. We're dealing with Palestine. One of the great supporters of dealing with the issue of Palestine is Alan Bosak.
Yeah.
One of the leaders in the South African movement. He has been very, very much involved with that, especially at the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference. And Claiborne Carson, who has done that's the King Papers, this kind of thing. Remember, the reason this is so important, and it's probably the most difficult issue for people to say anything about because of the fear of being called anti-Semitic. It has happened to me. Mm-hmm. And I had to come to the point where saying, well, what's worse, being called anti-Semitic? I've been called worse things in my life. I grew up in segregation, so I've been called a lot worse. Anti-Semitic, or what the Palestinians have to endure day after day after day after day.
Yeah.
And I'm afraid to speak up because I may be called anti-Semitic, especially when I'm not, when I know I am not anti-Semitic.
Right.
I'm opposing the policies of a nation.
Zionism.
So Bishop Tutu has said, what is happening is worse than apartheid in South Africa. Alan Bosak has said is worse than apartheid in South Africa. So how do we continue to allow this happen and don't take any stand against it?
Yeah.
Who in Congress will say a word against it?
Thank
So,
you. Thank you very much.
yeah, I will be happy to send you the information and
Oh, please.
you're
Yes,
available.
sure.
And then we'll have 3 Wednesdays, I think, with that. And we also have a special guest preacher on the 20th, but you're busy on Sunday.
Who's your guest preacher?
Tarek Aboeva or something. He used to be the head of Sabil.
Oh, yes. Yeah. I work with
Yeah,
him.
and he just recently resigned from there.
Okay.
But he's a Palestinian Christian and he will be preaching on the 20th.
Oh,
And
wonderful.
or 21st, whatever that
21st.
Sunday is.
That's,
Yeah.
that's fantastic.
And then we'll have the Wednesday nights after that. And then we're going to have some Wednesday nights for the Green Team is planning something for the rest of Lent and into Care of Creation Sunday. So we'll
Care
have
of Creation. Okay.
yeah. So we're going to have that. I'll send you links if you're interested.
You know, you care of creation. One of the things, well, you might want to look into some of the work that Brian Swim has done. With
Who?
Brian Swim. He's fabulous. He's a physicist. He's worked with Matthew Fox and Thomas Berry. They have a book called The Creation Story. I understand the book is not the easiest to read, but he has films. If you go to YouTube, but he talks about the universe coming into being and how everything had to be just at the right moment, right time, or whatever, to bring this into being. But his name is Brian Swim, S-W-I-M-M-E.
Okay. Okay, and so maybe after that, later in the spring, we can have you back.
We'll reconnect a little bit later.
Well, Dorothy, what's interesting is that PBS just put out a special called Backs Against the Wall.
Yes. Yes.
And there's a couple of films that are coming up. One is called The Psalms of Howard Thurman.
I'm hoping that will come up soon. She's been working on that for a long time. So, Arle Prelo.
And then, of course, the book, you gave us a little hit of it earlier, the biography Against the Hounds of Hell.
No, the book is, that book, is it going to be a book?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, wow, I have to get that.
It's supposed to be published this coming year, so.
Fantastic. The same person who produces Backs Against the Wall also has produced a film on Abraham Heschel. It's just, and Dorothy Day. But the one on Heschel has just been released. I haven't seen it, but hey, Heschel is one of my favorites. So, so watch that.
Yeah, her name's Arle Prelo.
Yes, Arle Prelo is the. She's been working on that for some time, so I'm glad to hear it's close to being released.
Well, you've given us all a preview, not just a preview, but a synopsis of Howard Thurman's life and thought. It's just incredible, Dorsey.
Thank you so much. I am honored, Hector. And Lynn, thank you for inviting me, all of you. I know Dr. Lynn had a lot to do with this. And so thank all of you for inviting me and for putting up with me, whatever. I know I can get carried. I can get carried away on some things. So,
I know that you usually go to bed around 8 o'clock, Dorothy, but
it's past your bedtime.
Can you hang out with some of the folks just informally if you want?
Sure.
Maybe some can hang out too. So
okay.
Super, super.
Oh, it's always a pleasure, and I never get bored listening.
Oh, thank you.
And I don't say that to many people. So
I've never heard it. I've never heard it.
I've got a couple of questions. One, Marvin, saw you on the news tonight.
Oh.
I would love to have a conversation with you about that subject. I'm not an alum. In the previous sessions, did you talk about our church and how some of this might work in our church, or who our church is, or was any of that part of it?
We did have conversations about that. And I, we talked, for example, about representation in the pulpit and the presence of greater diversity. And so I think, that has led to what we've seen over the past several weeks with more Black women and a stronger presence there. And so that's been great. And I think there are other conversations we were beginning to have that I think we could probably continue to have in terms of thinking about how this impacts, the worship ceremony. I have heard elements of this in the sermons, as well. So, and it was already there, but I feel like I've been able to make stronger connections to the liberatory elements of the preaching because of this experience.
Mm-hmm. Well, in the beginning of time in 1984, we put the church together with a very strong will or intention of what we wanted. And over time, we didn't keep that conversation going. And so I wondered if any of this had been discussed as part of where we are today.
Yeah, one of the things that is interesting that Dorsey, you said that might link us to churches like Ainsworth is the interconnectedness that Dr. Thurman always sought.
Right.
The statement that we cannot live in isolation of one
another.
I was doing a little bit of homework with my newest heroine, Amanda Gorman.
Right.
And she was interviewing at the age of 17 the poet laureate of Los Angeles, who was this incredibly crazy Chicano, great poet. And she said that because she lived in Los Angeles, she had access to an incredible diversity of cultures.
Right.
And she said, without that diversity, I could not be writing what I'm writing now.
Right.
So, we are linked, whether we like it or not.
I got carried away and I forgot to read my closing paragraph. That's okay, but it does deal with that. It's from Dr. Thurman's The Search for Common Ground, where he's saying that we have to have, the only way we can grow is to have people coming from various walks of life, different walks of life, our long lost brothers and sisters. That's the only way we can learn and grow forward in the search for the common ground. But he says it much more eloquently, and it's a longer passage, but it's just, it's just a beautiful, beautiful passage.
Yeah.
By the way, did you catch your poetess at the Super Bowl?
Oh, yes.
No, I didn't watch the Super Bowl. I'm glad I didn't watch it because I'm from Kansas
The football game wasn't worth anything, but
I was
some of the entertainment wasn't bad.
Yeah, I was saddened. I couldn't see the Chiefs getting blown away like that.
Oh, terrible.
Yeah.
I'm going to sign off. Thank you so much. It was nice meeting you.
It's wonderful meeting you, Colleen.
And I hope we see each other again on Zoom.
That's great. Thank you.
See you tomorrow, Colleen.
All right. See you in the morning.
Beth, I was interested in your comments. Your background is sort of synchronous or whatever with various cultures impacting you and you impacting them.
Yeah, definitely.
She speaks better Spanish than I do, Dorsey.
Do not speak better Spanish. That is not true. That is not true. Yeah, no, I was just thinking, where I grew up, which is Yakima Valley in Eastern Washington, and with a huge Latino community. But also I think in the last 10 years or so, I've been working for a local health department in public health and teaching and training community health workers using popular education and training community members also in popular education and community organizing. And I've had the great fortune of supporting culturally specific work. And I think, yeah, absolutely. That piece to me around we need each other. And, you know, as a white woman doing that work too, I just also reflect a lot around what's my role and like, you know, where do I step in and step back and create space and foster the container for diverse groups to come together and build relationship and work towards, you know, change together. It's been so, I just feel so lucky and it's been transformative for me as a person to be able to do that work. It's been amazing. Yeah. And I'm so thankful for Ainsworth too, and the spiritual home. I really just resonate with what you're talking about, like, you know, the mysticism and the action. And it's what keeps me grounded and going in that work. Because, you know, when you're in activist circles, you can see people who, not trying to make a judgment, but just in myself too, when I haven't been as grounded spiritually, you know, the action is just not as effective and fruitful as it can be when I'm really grounded in that sense of, you know, how is God propelling me to do this work, and where do I find my strength and purpose?
That is one of the tenets of liberation theology, is practice and reflection. That's why it is so powerful, especially in the Latin countries. You go out and work, and then you reflect, you go back. It's this dynamism that you reflect and you act, reflect. And that's what I'm saying, even our own personal growth comes out of dynamism. We learn, we act. It's not just saying, okay, I'm going to become a mystic or whatever, and I'm going to devote all my in isolation to becoming a better person. You can't do that. Is reflecting in terms of what you're doing and so on. It's that kind of dynamism. I was going to say, I think.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say I don't know if I suggested last time, and there's a movie I'm going to show in my class this semester, and it's called Brown Eyed, Blue Eyes. I don't know if you've seen it.
Oh.
Yeah, it's good. And it's a good way for people who say that I'm a white person, what can I do? That's an example of what a white person did. That was very, very meaningful. So that's all. Dr. Lynn.
And I know we're way over time, but I wanted to comment too, just about the importance of relationship, and that seems to be kind of Thurman's central thesis. Yes. Is relationship with God and with each other, right? And our relationship with each other is a reflection of our relationship with God.
Yes, definitely.
That you won't really have one without the other. And I think sometimes we think we can. We think that, you know, we can have a relationship sort of this way, and it's just me and God, right, and I ignore my brothers and sisters. And I think what Thurman is suggesting is that that's not so, right? Right. That you are out of alignment with God if you are not in relationship with your brothers and sisters.
Yes. And
so in terms of thinking about what's instructive for us at Ainsworth, that's another, I think, important principle to live by. And so I really appreciate that reminder, because I too get caught up in thinking about systems and systems change and you know,
have to.
Yeah, I was testifying today before the state, you know, legislature about teacher diversity and all of those things. And so trying to influence legislators, and you forget that, but it's ultimately about relationship. It's ultimately about honoring God through your love of your fellow man and woman.
Right. Right.
Oh, yeah.
It's not about having God in my little heart, personal salvation only.
Yeah.
No, it's about social transformation and salvation. And one of these days, I'm going to hear you sing.
You want to hear me sing?
I said, one of these days, I'm going to hear you sing.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I need to find out if you got
last
the album.
Sunday he sang, so it would be on YouTube.
Okay.
And this Sunday he's singing again. He'll be on YouTube.
Okay.
And Dorothy, it's worth either you cancel your service or you Zoom your service with us. Dr. Lynn remember how you and I used to complain about Hosea? We worked with Hosea. He was our boss, Dr. Hosea Williams, because not only was he a great preacher, but he was a great singer.
Oh,
Yeah.
And the few times that he was bombing in his sermons, he'd break out in song and nobody would remember that he was bombing. So the first time I ran into Dr. Lynn was when I heard him sing in church. And I said, oh my God, we have another
No, you
preacher.
preached
We
first.
have another preacher who can sing.
Preached first.
That's right.
Great.
But he sang at, well, Cynthia died.
Yeah, that was the first time I think I was at Ainsworth. As I was,
You were the speaker, the preacher
yeah, I was preaching.
for
Yeah,
Faith Formation Sunday.
right.
Good.
Yeah.
Faith
Yeah.
formation.
I
2 years.
hooked him right away. Cynthia hooked him to help her sing at the MLK, All City MLK service. And I went up to him and said, you want to preach for us? In our church? Actually, I think it was a little later than that, but yeah,
Well, this has been enriching. Thank you.
Well,
Thank you.
Thank you so much, all of you.
And it started with a little seed, Dr. Lynn.
Yeah. Well, thank you for honoring that.
Oh, there he is. Okay.
yeah. Cecil likes to go into
That's just-
disguise.
No, I had a phone call from Eldon talking
Oh.
about the green team.
Oh,
So he'll probably call you, Beth, as
He
well.
called me last night. Yeah.
Dorsey, Cecil has had a program on, what's the name of the station?
K-Boo.
KBOO, which is really one of the only stations that serves the
Radio.
community.
Mhm.
Cecil, how long you been in that program?
He doesn't know. Longer than I've been here, huh?
30 years, maybe?
Yeah, long time.
And it's a great service to community.
He
Great service.
interviews people. It's too
Yeah.
early in the morning for me, but
Well, it actually is. If you're talking about social movement, we can't do it without media, social media with the consciousness. So that's important.
Wow.
Well, thank you so much. I'm turning
Thank you.
into a pumpkin.
Okay, pumpkin.
you started to look orange.
Take care.
Thank you.
Have a
Thank
good
you,
night.
Beth. Thank you.
All right.
Good night, everybody.
Good night. I understand
As
that.
much as I can do it, I'll say good night as well. And
Okay.
thank you
Bye,
again.
Marvin.
All right.
Dr.
Let's see you
Lynn.
again.
Thank you.
Bye,
Miss Cecil.
Ann.
Okay.
Bye.
Goodbye. Well, thank you.
Yeah,
And
it's always good to see you.
always good to see you too. And just, I am going to see if I can tune in sometimes with some of the links that you sent me, and we'll see what can.
Yeah, I'll send those to you
I
for
love
the
the
Wednesday
service.
night things. But as far as hearing our service and hearing Marvin, you go to YouTube and just put in Ainsworth United Church of Christ.
Okay.
And it'll show you different, you can go to different worship services. And last week and then this coming week, the 14th, he'll be singing. We're
Sounds
doing, he and Cynthia Butts, our former choir director, music minister, sang together last week, and they're doing more music this week, a lot more for Black History Celebration.
Oh, I really would like to hear that. Okay.
Yeah. And I know Hector told me long ago or something, we never talked, I don't know if he talked to you about financial compensation for all your hard work.
I told Hector Lopez is one of my mentors.
That's right. I remember you said that before. It came up again. Somebody asked about that and if we were paying you. And if you didn't want to get paid, would it be, is there some place we could donate money in your honor that you would like?
Oh. Well, what the first place of being, I hate to say the church.
The
but-
church.
Yeah, I mean, that's fine.
Oh, fine, okay,
Is that, would that
That
be
was wonderful.
appropriate?
yes, that'll be fine.
Okay. And I could mail it to you, but have the check made out to your church.
Right.
It
Okay.
won't be as much as you deserve by all means.
Don't worry about that.
Because we didn't really have a budget, but we would like to do something because we're very, very grateful. And what the whole name of your church is, All Peoples or
No.
Fellowship of All Peoples.
Let me do it. The THE. You know, the short way, you want, if you're writing, I'll give you the full name. We just go by Fellowship Church. That will take care of it. But the full name is the Church for
Oh,
the Fellowship of All Peoples with an S. The Church for
or
the Fellowship of All,
all
ALL Peoples.
peoples.
Peoples, plural.
Yeah, that's what he said.
It
Oh.
was, I said it to a couple of people. They said, the Church of Old People? I said, no, all people. There may be old people too, you know, but that may be a characteristic of the person.
Well, we're grateful to your church
I'm
for
grateful.
sharing you.
Well, thank you very much.
And
We shall.
You did a really nice job, not only in your own sense of humor, but in sharing Doctor's wry sense of humor. He had a very wry sense of humor.
Yes.
Well, my friend, thank
Okay.
you again.
Thank you. I'm going to
Bless you and your church
yes,
and
blessings.
all you
thank
do.
you too. Thank you so much.
I'll
It's
be
been a pleasure.
emailing you.
Sounds great.
Okay.
Dorothy, remember what I asked you to do? Learn how to say no.
Not to us, though.
To her particularly.
And it's been a pleasure meeting you. I don't know if
And
I don't
sleeping.
know.
I think it's okay.
I don't know.
All right.
Oh, there she is. She heard. You're muted, darling.
Okay.
Oh, well.
Just
You're
wanted to
muted.
say good night and
night.
thank you.
We love you.
All right,
Take care.
Dorothy.
Take it, love you too.
Blessings to you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Good night.